We begin today at the Gemara on Daf Pei Zayin Amud Beis. We're starting at the Mishnah. The Mishnah continues with halachas regarding the actual writing of the get itself. Zog Teilige Mishnah Shaye Miktsas Haget. A person is writing the get on a paper, and the get is written with one column, but then he doesn't complete the whole nusach of the get in that column, and v'kosvay b'daf hasheni. And he continues writing the get on the same piece of paper on a second column. That's Rashi's pshat. That it is the same piece of paper, but he continues in the next column. Va'edim ulmata. And you have edim that are signed below when he finishes the nusach of the get, below at the second column. Kosher. So the signature in such a way is going to be kosher. So we'll see in the Gemara the chiddush of this. Usually a get is not written in two columns. And when you see a get that is written in two columns, there's a chashash that something is strange over here. But nevertheless, whatever chashash there may be, the Gemara will explain that we're not concerned. Now, chasmu edim bereish hadaf. If the edim, instead of signing at the bottom of the document, as it always is, they signed at the top. Or minatzad, they signed on the side, on the margins of the page, on the right side or on the left side. Oy meyachrav, or they signed on the back of the get. So beget pashut, if this is the usual get that we use, pasul. The get will be pasul. The Mishnah is saying get pashut as opposed to a get makusha, the get that's used by the kainim where they would write and fold. Over there, Chachamim were masakin that the signatures goes on the folds, which is really on the outside of the get. But by a regular get, the signatures have to be at the bottom of the get. Now, hikiv roishe shel zeh b'tzad roishe shel zeh. What happens if you have two Gittin that are written on the same paper? Now, what it means, Hikif Reisha, means that you have the top of the nusach of both of these Gittin that are written on the same paper that are near each other. So the way to imagine this is, if you have a piece of paper in front of you, so one get, they began to write in the middle of the page. And they wrote that get to the bottom of the page. Now take that page, turn it upside down, and now you have half of the page empty. Begin writing a get from the middle of the page, going also to the bottom. So it comes out that right in the middle of the page, you have the beginning, the head of these two nuschayos of the Gittin that are going down to the end of the page. And now in between, there was a signature. That's where the Edim signed. V'Edim be'emtza. So the Edim are in the middle. So Shneihem psulin. So in such a case, the signatures do not connect to either one of the writings, because if you have it written Reisha Shel Zeh to Reisha Shel Zeh and they're upside down from each other, the signatures in between, b'manavshach, is not going to work, because for one get it's a signature on top of the nusach of that get, and we just said that the signatures has to be on the bottom of the nusach of the get, and the same for the other. It's on the top of the nusach of the get, and it's actually upside down from that get. So either way, the signature does not go on anything. What's if you have a get that's written Soifei Shel Zeh b'tzad Soifei Shel Zeh? You have the Gittin also that are two nuschayos of a get that are written on the same paper, but over here the end of one get is meeting the end of the other nusach of the get. So the way it was written is pashut. A person started writing a get from the top of the page, not from the center of the page. He started writing one get from the top of the page, and he goes to the middle. Then he turns the page upside down, and he writes another nusach of the get from the top of the page to the middle. So you end up having, they meet in the middle, the end of both Gittin meet in the middle. And then v'ha'edim be'emtza, and the edim signed in the middle. So as sha'edim nikrim imai, so over here the edim actually could be read with one nusach. The ones that the edim are read together with that nusach of the get, they're facing, the signatures is facing in the right direction, that it's read together with that get, kosher. So that get has a signature, it's kosher.
So what is kosher on that?
One nusach will be kosher, and the other one will be pasul. Reisha Shel Zeh b'tzad Soifei Shel Zeh. If you have two Gittin on the same paper, and you have the top of the get that's near the end of one get, so this is basically two Gittin that are written one after the other on the same paper. You wrote one nusach, and then you just continued writing another nusach below that. And now v'ha'edim be'emtza, and you have the edim in the middle. So es sha'edim nikrim b'soifoi kosher. So the top nusach of the get on this paper and the edim assigned below it, so that's a perfect signature for that top nusach. But then when you wrote the get again below it, the signatures of the edim that are on the top of that is not going to be read with it. It's not good. Okay, so these are all the scenarios of the location of the signature on the get is. Now the Mishnah says another thing regarding which we already quoted before in the Gemara. Get shekasvei ivris. If the style of the writing of the get was the style of Ivris, as we mentioned before, Rashi's prat of Ivris means that it's written in Lashon Kodesh, and when you write names, the person's name is written first and his father's name is written second. So, for example, if the name would be Yosef ben Shimon, Yosef is your name, and Shimon is the father's name. And the Eidah of Yevonis. But then when the Eidim signed, they signed also in Lashon Kodesh, but they used the style of the Yevonim, the way they sign. What was the style of the way things were written in Yavon? If you write Yosef ben Shimon, Yosef is your father's name, and when it says ben Shimon, it means Yosef has a son and his name is Shimon. So the style of the writing of the get and the style of the signatures are not the same. Or the opposite, Yevonis, the get was written with the Yevonis style, the Eid of Ivrim, and the Eidim wrote in the Ivri style. Or another scenario, Eid Echad Ivri, one Eid is signing in the Ivri style, the Eid Echad Yevani, and another Eid is signing in the Yevani style. So in all of these cases, the Bach adds in over here, kosher. In all of these cases, the get is kosher. Another halacha, Ksav Sefer Ve'eid. If you have the get with the writing of the Sefer that he wrote, and then you have the Eid that signed, one Eid that signed his get, kosher. The get will be kosher. We also had this quoted before, as we'll see in the Gemara here. The Gemara teaches, Rabbi Yirmiyah says that Ksav Sefer actually means that the Sefer didn't just write, but the Sefer also signed his name, and then you have a signature of an Eid, so you have two signatures. Now here, the Mishnah specifies exactly what it is. When you sign a get, what do you have to sign? So if you signed your name as follows, Ish Ploini Eid, so-and-so, you signed your name, and you added the word Eid, kosher. Then the get is kosher. If you signed Ben Ish Pliny Eid, you only signed that you're a son of so-and-so, and you added the word Eid, kosher. Then this signature is also kosher, even though you didn't mention your own name. Ish Pliny, Ben Ish Pliny, if you're writing your own name, Ben Ish, your father's name, Veloikas of Eid, even if you didn't write the word Eid, kosher. Then the get is going to be kosher. So as the Mefarshim explained, the point here is, when you sign a get, what's the reason why you have to add the word Eid to the get? Because otherwise it may seem like, when you write the nusach of the get is written in such a way that it's like the husband himself writing it. The get says, I, so-and-so, are divorcing so-and-so. So that's how the get is written. It's all the husband giving a letter, a sefer krisis to his wife. If you have names at the bottom of the get, and it doesn't say the word Eid, it could almost look like, and the husband himself is signing these names. So you have to write the word Eid, that it should be clear that it's not the husband speaking, but it's an Eid that signed it. But nevertheless, what the Mishnah says is, if someone writes his name and his father's name, so then that makes it clearer that these Eidim that signed are identifying themselves fully, that this is who I am, so it makes it clear that it's not the husband that wrote those signatures, so even without the term Eid, or the word Eid, it's good enough. And the Mishnah adds on this last thing, the Nikiya Das, the special people in Yerushalayim, which are pure, so when they signed, they also signed without adding the word Eid. They would sign Bekitzer and their name, their father's name, without adding the word Eid. If in the get, what was written is a family name, not the name of the people, but the family names, so the family names is also enough to identify and kosher. The get will be kosher. So we had earlier, this is one of the main halachas when it comes to a get. We had it earlier in the Masechta that you have to figure out the names of the husband and wife, and you have to know all nicknames, and you have to write both of them to the get. There's svarim that are written on the subject to know exactly how you spell the name right, and to get the name right, and to know exactly the kinui of the person. But here the Mishnah says that if you write the family names, so that is also good. Zok the Gemara, going back to the first case in the Mishnah, when you have a get that's written with two columns. And the Mishnah says, you have one column, a second column, and the signatures are in the second column, it's fine. Frag the Gemara, but why is that fine? When we see a get that's written in such a strange manner, isn't there a chashav here? Velecho shouldn't be concerned, dilme hani tre gitu havo. If it's two columns, maybe what really happened over here is, it's two different nuschayos of a get that were written here. And now what happened is with these two columns, okay, so how the way Rashi describes what the Gemara is saying is, if you have two columns that are written on the same piece of paper, side by side, and the first line of both columns starts on the same place in the page, and they're written side by side, so then if you know for a fact that they were written this way, then there's no problem. But what the Gemara is saying is, when you see two columns in one paper of a get, so you don't know what happened. Maybe one column was written where you see it over here, where it starts, and then the other column of the get was really written on the same piece of paper higher up. It was written higher up in the paper. And then what happened is this person went and cut off a section of the second column that was written higher up, and he cut off a section of the get of the first column that was at the bottom, and now he's really connecting the beginning of the nusach of one get and the end of the nusach of another get to form one get over here. Is that what's going on? If you have two gittin that are written side by side, so then there wouldn't be this chash that you can cut off the top or the bottom. But what the Gemara is saying is, when you see two columns in the nusach of a get, so it's possible that originally one column was written lower down on the page, and another column was written higher up on the page, and it could be so far high and low on the page that the ending point of the second column is sort of near the starting point of the first column. And then what did this person do? He just went and cut off the tops and the bottoms he cut off the bottom of the previous column, and now it's connecting to the column on the next page. Okay, let's see the lashon of the Gemara the way it says it.
You can't see all that.
Huh?
You can see all
One second, let's see. So it says the Gemara, so we should be concerned that Hanitre get to have really there's two gittin here. Vesramile zman de kamo, and now the zman of the previous get. When the Gemara uses the term zman, it means the whole nusach that you write of the get, and the edim the basra, and then the end of the nusach of the second column. Which, what do you have at the end of that nusach? That's where the edim sign. So they sort of meet each other. And what did this person do? The gazye lizman de basra, and this person cut off the top part of the second column. The edim de kama, and he cut off the edim at the bottom of the first column. And now he's using these two columns together to be one get. And he cut it off in such a way where it fits perfectly. The last word of the first column and the first word on the second column, it goes as one hemshech, and it becomes one get. And Rashi explains what would be the motivation of a Baal to do such a thing. If he had a perfect get on the first column with the signatures of Edom, why would he want to cut that off and now have it connect to this Edom on the second column? Because it could be that in the first column, before the signatures of the Edom, there was a certain condition that was written into the get. Or again, so it's really not the motivation of the Baal to do this. It could be the Isha wants to do such a thing. And so she wants to get rid of those conditions. So she cuts out the bottom, and now it connects to the signatures on the next column, and now she has to get without any of those conditions.
So she did it.
Yeah, chayre, that's... Huh?
For sure it's good. So then they
No. Why is it good? She's cutting out. It comes out. The signatures.
She got a good check, and then she played around. So
Yeah, but now she the get that she has. No. It was cut off. It could be that it was cut off even before it was given to her. Right, when she saw what kind of get she's going to be getting over here, so she told the shliach that's bringing the get. She played around with it. She cut it off before she even got it. Right? It comes out that the get that she got into her hands has no signatures, because the signatures that are here in the paper were really signatures from a different get. It's not a continuation. Now again, usually by any get, the Gemara will never bring up such a question that maybe the get was cut. We're not choishes for such a thing. But when you see something so strange with a get of two columns, so here there's room to be choishish that really it was really two gittin, and that's why it's two columns, and she turned it into one get.
Even she got it, and she cuts it off.
Right.
The thing what she cut is on the tonight, and if you don't do the
Okay, so now correct. Okay, so it'll be a problem, correct? Omar Abba, Omar Rav. So the Gemara answers, Rav said in the name of Rav, Kishayesh Revach Mumata. We could see that there's space on the bottom. So we clearly see that if there's space in the bottom, that it wasn't cut off over there. The nusach of the get on the bottom ended, and then the space, and then it continues in the next page. So because of that space, we know that the bottom wasn't cut off. If it was cut off, then there wouldn't have been that space over there. Vidilme, fragt the Gemara, but still, Shash should still be explaining me regarding the bottom, that we see that the space on the bottom. But Dilme Zman de Basra megas Geise. But you didn't answer the question regarding the top of the second column, that maybe over there, he cut off on the top, then it should continue from the bottom. Right? So in other words, what happened was, maybe the first get was taka written, and there was nothing cut off. But maybe he didn't finish the first get. He wrote part of the first get, and then he decided, forget it, we're not finishing the first get. But then she went and she uses without the husband ever finishing writing the get. The get on the first column was never finished to be written. She didn't have to cut off anything because the husband never finished writing it. And then she goes and she cuts off from the top column, and now she connects the second column to the first column without the husband ever finishing writing the get on the first column. So there's still a problem with cutting off the top of the second column and connecting it to the first. That we didn't answer. So the Gemara says the same answer. Like Rabbi just said, in the name of Rav, just like regarding the first column, there's space below, and that indicates that she didn't cut it off. So Hachanami, so too regarding the second column, there's space on the top, and you see that there wasn't writing above it that she cut off because there's space there. So we can see from the fact that there's space on the bottom and space on the top that you didn't cut it off. Okay, but the Gemara is still not done. Fragt the Gemara, but v'dilme, when we see a get written in two columns, there's still a concern there. Because maybe imluchi, imlech, v'kasav, maybe what happened is, first he wrote a get. And when he wrote the get in the beginning, so he changed his mind and he decided he's not going to divorce her. That was the first part of the get that he wrote on the first side. And then, after a while, after he wrote half of the get, and as it could happen, as a person is writing a get and it's becoming more and more serious, he sort of says, forget it, I'm not doing this, and he stops writing it. And then 10 days later, he finally comes to terms with it, and he continues writing the second column. So in other words, Gemara's question is, it would look like the fact that it's written one column and a second column, that they were not written at the same time. And if it's not written at the same time, there's a problem. What's the problem here? So Rashi here says two things, it's a problem. First of all, Rashi says, the moment you decide that the chelik of a nusach of a get that you're not going to use, you don't want it for a get, so that get is batel. You can never use that again. Rashi doesn't explain why. There's a discussion in Rishonim about this, but Rashi says if you change your mind, I don't want to use that, so the first chelik is not a get anymore. So now, if you then 10 days later decide I want to continue writing the get, you can't combine the second half to the first half. The first half is already batel. Besides that, Rashi says, the other issue would be that the signatures of the Eidim at the bottom of the second half of the get on the second column was on a different date than the writing of the first part of the get. And the klal is, Eidim have to sign a get on the same date that the get was written. But here, it could be written and signed on different dates. So there should still be a problem. And says the Gemara, the kasa, the case over here is that we see these two columns, and the way it was written was, Hareyat mulmata, the lashon of hareyat, and you are the first hareyat muteres. That's the main nusach of the get. So he wrote hareyat at the bottom of the first column, umuteres mulmaila, and then the word muteres, that was mulmaila. So therefore, we see that this is one continuation. The Gemara now is answering. There's no chash that he wrote one chelik at one time, and then 10 days later he changed his mind and then came back and wrote the other one. It's mamish in one sentence. So because the hemshech of both columns is one sentence, we're not chayshish. But the Gemara still presses on and asks, well, v'dilme esrami lei, maybe it did happen. Maybe as he's writing the words hareyat, and he stopped, and then he changed his mind, and then he came back 10 days later and wrote the second column. Says the Gemara, no, kulahai loy cheshinan. To such an extent, we're not chayshish when we see the two columns is mamash a continuation of the very one statement of the get. We're not chayshish that maybe it wasn't written at the same time. Okay, this is all one version to understand our Mishnah. Now, Rav Ashi says, going back to the beginning of the whole question over here, that we asked that maybe these two columns shows that there was more here, and it was cut off from both sides. Says Rav Ashi, we're not chayshish for that. The yediyah bei meschete de megilte. You can see by a parchment, if it's cut off, you could see it was cut off. By a paper or by a parchment that's not cut off, the parchment, when it comes towards the end, thins out. At least the way it was made then. It thins out towards the end, and you can tell that it's the end of the parchment naturally. But if it was cut off, you would see that it doesn't thin out in that way, and therefore you would be able to notice that it was cut off. So the whole question the Gemara asked from the beginning over here, that maybe it was cut off on the bottom, cut off on the top, is not a question, because you could see it wasn't cut off. Then the Gemara said, the Mishnah said, you sign on the top or on the side, these signatures are not good. Like the Gemara, is this true? But for Harav, Chasim and Atzad, when it came to documents, so Rav, of course, had a bezdin and he would sign documents. Where would he sign his name? He would sign it on the side of the document. So how can we say that the signature on the side is not good? Answers the Gemara, it depends how you sign on the side. Hasam b'shegagoy klapik sav. when Rav signed, so the top of the letters was facing the actual writing on the paper. So that's good. So then the ksav goes on what's written here. But when it says in our Mishnah that you can't sign on the side, that's when the bottom of the letters are facing the paper. So it looks like the signature is really going on something else that was on the other side of the letters, not on the what's written over here. Fragt the Gemara, but if so, so then what did it say in the Mishnah? If you have two Gittin that are written on the same paper, and the top of the Neschais of both of the Gittin are near each other, as I explained before, and they're sort of written opposite from each other, and they meet right in the center of the paper. And the Eidim are signed in the middle, so Shneyem Psulim. So what did we say? That this signature is not going to be good for either one of them. But the question is, why not? What you're saying now is that a get doesn't have to necessarily be signed at the bottom. As long as the head of the letters, the top of the letters faces this writing of the get, it's good enough. Even if it faces it from the side, and so too if it faces it from the top, it should also be good. It should be kosher.
Mishnah said one should be good.
No. In this case, the Mishnah said both are puzzle. That's what the Mishnah said, right? In this case, when both the tops of both of the Gittin are facing each other, again, what the person did, he started writing one get in the middle of the paper, then turned it over and started writing the other one in the middle. So they're both facing each other. So the Mishnah said the signature in the middle is not good for either one of them. But the Gemara is now asking why not. We just said the klal is as long as the top of the letters is facing that writing of the get, it's good. So it should be good at least for one. Answers the Gemara, no. So we're going to have to say that the pshat is Hasam de Rami le Ki'ivre. In the Mishnah, when he signed between these two Gittin, that their heads of both of these Gittin meet each other in the center of the page, he didn't sign with the lettering facing, the top of the lettering, facing either one of these Gittin here. Rather, it was written Ki'ivre. The word of Ki'ivre literally means a bolt of a door. Just like a bolt of a door sticks out, so too the way the writing in the middle was written, it was written in the other way. It was written... Usually, until now, we thought that you signed the get in the same way the rest of the get was written, in the width of the paper. Right? Elamai, the question is which direction the head of the letters are facing and which direction the feet of the letters are facing. But now the Gemara says, no, it was written perpendicular. It's written from up down, right, in the length of the paper. So it's like a bolt sticking out. So therefore, it can't connect either one of the writings.
It's on the side.
But it's not. Wasn't in the side though. It's in between. It's in between though. But you can't say that the head of the letters connect to either one of them. Fragt the Gemara, but you can't say this pshat, because if so, hihachi seif diktani. What does it say in the next case of the Mishnah? If you have two Gittin that are written one on top of the other, and v'ha'edim be'emtza, and the signatures of the Eidim are in between. So the Mishnah said, Es sha'edim nikrin b'soifai, the ones that the Eidim are signed and are read at the end of the get, right above it, so then kosher, it'll be kosher. But v'idar rami ki'ivra, if the signatures are there like a bolt, meaning it's written perpendicular and it's not written in the width together with the rest of the get, so lav ba'adi hai mikri v'lav ba'adi hai mikri. So the signature that's in between there can't be read with either one of the Gittin. It's written in a different direction. It's sticking in between, written in the length of the paper. So how could the Mishnah say that either one would be kosher? So therefore the Gemara has charata from the pshat that it said before. Again, the Gemara before wanted to say as long as the head of the letters are facing the get, it's good. But now the Gemara says no. A signature on the side is not good. Signature on the top is not good. It must be on the bottom. Rav would sign on the side. Rav b'diski havachasim. When Rav signed on the side, it wasn't for a get. It wasn't for a real document, for a loan, for a sale, but it's b'diski. Rashi says b'diski means when Rav would give out a summons to or a subpoena to call people to Bezdin, such a kind of a document he would sign on the side. Just like that his name should be there, that he should know it came from Rav, but it wasn't the proper signature needed for a real document. So the Gemara, the next thing it said in the Mishnah was Getcha Kosvei Ivris v'chulu, and then the Mishnah said Ksav Sefer Veit Kosher. You have the writing of the Sefer and 1/8 is kosher. Now, what does that mean? It sounds like the Mishnah is saying 1/8 is good enough, and you can combine it with the writing of the Sefer. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says that's not the pshat. Rabbi Yirmiyah Chsam Sefer Shaninu. That over here actually the Sefer is signed and together with 1/8. That's what the Mishnah is saying. Now, Amar Rav Chisda, on this Rav Chisda said, and we had this brought already in the Masechta a few times before, Hamani Rav Yosi, the Mishnah here is following the opinion of Rav Yosi. Now, what's the background of this? Why do we need Rabbi Yossi here? Because the concern that we have over here is that when the Sefer signed the get, he shouldn't have signed it, because the husband never wanted him to sign. But when a husband appoints, or it's possible when a husband appoints a shliach to have a get written, so what does he say? He says, here, go to this Sefer and he'll write the get, and then have these two Eidim sign it. But then what happens when they come to the Sefer finishes writing the get, and the Sefer says, okay, so let me sign it as well. And the shliach says, no, we have two Eidim that the husband wants to sign. The Sefer gets very offended by this. You don't trust my signature. You trust me to write, but I can't sign. You have to have another two Eidim. All you need is one more Eid. So it's possible, Chashir is, when the Sefer signed, maybe the husband never wanted him to sign, and he signed, and then with one more Eid. So, but it's not really the two signatures that the husband wanted. But the Gemara says, if you go according to Rabbi Yossi, we're not chayshish for this. Because if you remember, Rabbi Yossi said a klal in the Masechta, no Eidim could sign a get without hearing it directly from the husband himself. Because there's a klal, mili lemimsaran l'shliach. You can't appoint a shliach to tell Eidim to sign. They have to hear it directly from the husband himself. So there's no chash that a seif is going to sign a get without hearing it from the husband himself. And the seif is not going to be offended. If he didn't hear it from the husband himself, he's not going to think of signing it. So if we see the seif sign the get, we know that he heard it from the husband. That's the pshat in the Mishnah here. The Gemara brings a story. There was a ksubah document for a marriage for chsanim. The asil kamei, the Rabavo, that was brought in front of Rabavo. Now they wanted to verify this as a authentic document. Now the havayadeh le'letoivse, and they were able to verify the handwriting of the actual ksubah, and only the signature of one aid. So they couldn't verify both signatures. So Rabavo thought that we could be machshir this, just like it says in our Mishnah that the ksav of the sefer could be combined together with the aid. So maybe verifying the writing, the handwriting with one signature is good enough. Rabbi Yirmiyah answers and says, no, chasam sefer shanino. In our Mishnah it says that the sefer is signed as well. So you have to verify two signatures. You can't just verify the handwriting. Then the Mishnah said, kosher, if you had the family names that were written, that's also going to be kosher. Tan Rabbanon. So we learned in Abraisa about this. In those times of the Gemara, and we know this in history, the family names over generations would change. So chanichas ava is begittin, family names that are written into a get, up to what generation could that be a proper identification for the person? Ad yud dairis. If it's a family name, up to 10 generations before. But if it's further than 10 generations, so then we can't rely on that family name that could change, and therefore it's not a good identification of the person. Rav ben Elazar says gimel dairis, only up to 3 generations. More than 3 generations, we can't rely on the family name. Kasha, until then it's kasha. More than 3 generations, puzzle, it'll be puzzle. According to which opinion there's this that Rab Chanina said, go kasav chanichas always begittin. You write family names regarding in a get ad gimel dairis up to 3 generations. The family name that was used up to 3 generations is kosher. Kaman Rab Shimon ben Elazar, like we just said, like Rab Shimon ben Elazar's opinion. Amar Rav Huna, so Rav Huna says, what's the source for this? That we rely on a family name up to 3 generations. My kara, because the pasuk says, Kisaylat banim ubnei banim v'nei shantem. So banim is 1 generation, and it's the 2nd generation already. And bnei banim is the 3rd generation, and after the 3rd generation, the pasuk says v'nei shantem. It becomes old, meaning now you can't rely anymore on the family name. That's the remez of what we learned from this pasuk.
At least 3 generations.
Again?
It's at least 3 generations. At least.
What do you mean at least? No, the most. When you talk about using a family name, if that family name was used by a father or by a grandfather, then you could still use it. But then a family name from a great-grandfather, that you can't use anymore because that family name is too old. Not now dafke, it's the way this family is identified today. So it's too old. And Ishantem. Now since the Gemara brought in this pasuk, we'll have a piece of Agadata here in connection with this. So Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, Lechor v'Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael was not destroyed. Acha avdu ba zayin bate dinim avodah zarah. Until there were 7 bate dinim that served avodah zarah. Now, even though the Gemara uses the term bate dinim, but it really refers to 7 different kings that had bate dinim that served avodah zarah. Who were these 7 kings? So the Mishnah here, the Gemara here brings 7 of the Malchei Yisrael. The Elohim, Yeravam ben Avat, Basha ben Achia, Achav ben Omri, Yehu ben Nimshi, Upikach ben Amalyo, Umenachem ben Gedi, Vaisheya ben Elah. And Vaisheya ben Elah was the last of the Malchi Yisrael at the end of the first Beis HaMikdash. And that's when the Eden went into Galus, when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Rashi here has an arichas about this, that the Gemara here is only mentioning the Malchi Yisrael, and it doesn't even mention all of them. It skips some of them because some are included in the families of others that are mentioned, and it doesn't mention the Malchi Beis David because they were in the same time period. So it mentions only these Malchi Yisrael here. So there was 7, and after these 7, that's when the Yidden were exiled. Shenema, we learn this from the pasuk where it says, Lala, Yeledes Hashiva. Unfortunate is the one that gives birth to these 7. Nafcha, Nafsha, that her soul is mourning and is very depressed. Ba Shimsha, her son came down by the Yom, middle of the day. Baisha v'chafra, she's embarrassed and ashamed. So this 7 here refers to these 7 kings. But Ravami says, my kara. Where's the remez that the Yidden are going to be exiled after these 7 serve Avodah Zarah? From the pasuk, Yisolet banim ubnei banim. So here there's a remez for 7. What's the remez for 7? Solet, give birth, is 1 generation. Banim, plural term, is another 2. Ubnei, again a plural term, is another 2. So that's 5. And again banim is another 2. So that's 7. This Ishaya ben Ela that we just mentioned, the last of the Malchi Yisrael. So in his times the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, but the pasuk says, "Vayas hara b'nei Hashem." He also behaved bad in Hashem's eyes, but rak loike Malchi Yisrael, not as bad as the other kings before him. And it says, all of Allah Shalmaneser v'Gaimitz, in his times that Shalmaneser, which was the king of Asher, came and he exiled the Aseres HaShvatim. 10 Shvatim went into Galus then. But the question is, why did this happen in his time period if he wasn't as bad as the previous kings? Amaluhu, so he answered them, Rav answered as follows. Oisam paradisois. So there were these officers, these guards, that Yeravam placed on the roads, to prevent Yidden of being Oile Regel. But Hoshea came, Ubitlon, and he removed them. This is actually one of the things that happened on Chamishas above. And even though now all Yidden had the opportunity to be Oile Regel, the Yidden were not Oile Regel. So now that's why the Yidden got exiled. For those years that the Yidden had the opportunity, and they still were not Oile Regel, they'll be captured, and that's why 10 of the Shvatim were captured by the king of Asher. Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Manukve, Amrila, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Dorash Mereimer Dashan, Maidich. What's the meaning of the pasuk where it says, Vayishkei Hashem al Ra? The Eibishter was diligent on the bad. Vayiviyah Aleinu, and the Eibishter brought it upon us. Ki Tzadik Hashem Alekeinu, because the Eibishter is righteous. So what does this mean? Mishum the Tzadik Hashem Alekeinu, because of Hashem being righteous. Therefore, Vayishkei Hashem al Ra, Vayiviyah Aleinu. So He brings the bad upon us. What does this mean? Ella, yet in this case, the fact that the Eibishter brought Yidden in the Galus early, as we'll see, 2 years early, it was actually a tzedakah. Tzedakah, Asa Kadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. The Eibishter did a tzedakah for Yidden. Shehigla Galus Tzidkiyahu Va'adayin Galus Yechanya Kayemes. So now what this means is, when it came to the Galus, by the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, there was first Galus Yechanya, which happened a certain time period before the final destruction and the final Galus. And in that Galus Yechanya, as we'll see here, all the big Talmidei Chachamim from Eretz Yisrael were exiled to Bavel. And then, years later, the whole Klal Yisrael was exiled into Bavel. So the first Galus is Galus Yechanya, and the second Galus is Galus Tzidkiyahu. But the righteousness of the Eibishter was, when the Yidden all finally came, they came to Bavel early enough that the Talmidei Chachamim from the first Galus going into Bavel were still alive. The Chsiv, as we can see this from the pasuk, that the first Galus were these great Talmidei Chachamim, because the Chsiv be Galus Yechanya. Regarding Galus Yechanya, the pasuk describes who went into Galus then. HaChodesh v'Hamazger Elef. There were 1,000 that went into Galus then, and they're all called Chodesh HaMazger, which means Talmidei Chachamim. What does this term Chodesh HaMazger mean? Cheresh means Shebishah Shapaischim, where they open their mouth to speak words of Torah. Nasa Kol Kachareshin. Everybody else is quiet. No one has anything to say in their presence. And Masgir means Kivin Shesaygrin. If they close a subject, meaning if they say we can't understand this subject here in Torah, Shuv Einan Paischin. So they can't open it up again. There's nobody that could explain it. These were the greatest Talmidei Chachamim. And the Kama, how many of them went into Galus the first time when Yechanya was exiled with them? Elef. There were 1,000 of them. So if the Eibishter would have delayed the Galus of the Yidden, so then in that generation that went first in the Galus would have all passed away, then Yidden would come into Galus, they would have nobody to teach them Torah, and Torah would have gotten lost. So the righteousness of Hashem was that they came early enough that they were able to teach them Torah, and the Torah in Babel continued. Ula Amar, Ula says another pshat that the stock of the Eibishter is shehiktim shtei shanim levinishantem. The Eibishter brought Eden to Golus 2 years before the gematria of Nishantem. The gematria of Nishantem is 852. So if you count the years from when Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael until when Yidden were exiled by the first base of Mikdash, it's 850 years, 2 years before the time. And the reason the Eibishter did this is because in the pasuk of V'Nishantem that we quoted before, it continues and it says, Ki oved teveda, that the Eibishter will destroy you. So if they would have went into Golus when it says in the pasuk V'Nishantem, then it could have been fulfilled. The Eibishter would have destroyed Yidden completely. So he brought them into Golus early, so then the oved teveda of the pasuk was not fulfilled. Ravacha Bar Yaakov said about this, Shma Mino, from this gematria of V'Nishantem, which is 852, so from here we see Meheira Demari Alma. When it says in the pasuk Meheira that Eden will be immediately destroyed, that's what it says there in that pasuk V'Nishantem. After V'Nishantem it says Ki Ovei Tevedun Maher, as Rashi brings. So how quickly is Meheira by the Eibishter? Tmani Meya V'Chamshim V'Tartihu. It's 852 years. That's the Meheira. And so Tosfos here explains that because really from when Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, they already had Avodah Zarah that came along with them. Tosfos brings they came into Eretz Yisrael with Pesel Micha. So all these years, the Eibishter says, if you have Avodah Zarah with you, I'll destroy you immediately. And how quickly was that immediately? So by the Eibishter says he waits V'Nishantem 852 years. Zok Teilige Mishnah, another very, very important halacha regarding a get, that a get has to be given with the husband's consent, without any forcing, without any compulsion. So Zok Teilige Mishnah, get Ma'osa B'Yisrael, a get that is being forced, but it's being forced by Yiddish Bezdin. So then it's going to be kosher. In such a case, it will be kosher, and the Gemara will explain that that's only if the Bezdin is forcing a Yid to give a get in a situation where al pidin, they're supposed to force him to give a get. So such a get will be kosher. If the get is being forced by goyim for that the Yid should give the get, then possible. Then this get will be possible. But if Yidden want to hire a goyish court or goyim to come and force a Yid to give a get, and the goyim are hearing him and they have to tell him, it's not us that are forcing you, we're forcing you to give the get because this is what the Yiddish Bezdin says, that you have to give the get, and then such a get will be kosher. Okay, so here the Gemara elaborates on exactly when this get will be kosher if it was forced by Yidden. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, get Hamosa B'Yisrael. This get that was given by force by Yiddish Bezdin, but that's only if it's Gittin, a situation where the din demands that the get should be given, then it'll be kosher. So Rashi says there are certain examples where the halacha is that a person has to divorce his wife and he has to give her a ksuba, or there's some situations where he's also to continue living with her. So al pi halacha, the Bezdin has to force him to give a get, and it'll be kosher. Here regarding this is the famous Rambam that says even though B'Payil is being forced, it's not considered to be a get by compulsion, because if al pi Torah he has to give a get, that is the true ratzon of the Yid to fulfill the will of the Torah, and therefore the get is kosher. It's considered to be with his consent. Shaloi kedin though, if the Bezdin is forcing the Yid to give the get and al pi Torah he doesn't have to give, then possible. Then this get will be possible. It's against his will. But the Shmuel says even though it's possible, but nevertheless upaisel. On one hand, the get is possible and she can't get married to anyone, she's still an Eishes Ish, but at the same time though, because of this itself, she'll become possible to marry a Kohen. If her husband dies and she's an Almana, she'll become possible because there's a Reach a get over here, there's something of a get here, it's because a Yiddish Bezdin has the power to force. So therefore, even if they did it Shaloi Kedin, nevertheless, there's a Reach a get and she becomes possible to marry a Kohen. Now, when it comes to goyim that are forcing a Yid to give a get, so kidin, if the goyim are forcing this person to give a get in the case where al pi Torah is supposed to give a get, pasul, this get will be pasul, but also paisel. It will also pasul of marrying a kohen. Shaloi kidin, if the goyim are forcing a Yid, and it's also shaloi kidin, al pi Torah is not supposed to give a get, then I feel a reach a get by. There's no reach a get, there's nothing of a get there, and she's still an Eishes Ish, and she can still marry a kohen. Now the Gemara asks, Manav Shach, that either way you look at it, it's hard to understand regarding the case that it said by the Goyim that are forcing Kidin. That case that Shmuel said, if Goyim force Kidin, so the get is possible, but there's a Reach HaGet, and it passes from marrying a Kohen. Why? If Goyim could be used to force someone to give a get, so this get should be kosher. If Goyim can't be used b'chlal to force to give a get, so it's clear that it's not a get at all. So mifsulei lifsul, she shouldn't be even possible to marry a kohen because there's no reach a get here at all. By a Yiddish court, you understand that if when a Yiddish court forces shaloi kedin, but since a Yiddish court could force, so there's a reach a get. But by a Goyish court, if they can't force at all, even if it's a case where the get is being given kedin, but why should there be any reich a get over here? It's Goyim. Amar Rav Misharshi, so Rav Misharshi says, the truth is that min ha-Torah, get ma'usa ba'ivdik echavim, a get that was given by force, and Goyim were used to force to give the get, kosher. The get really is kosher min ha-Torah. Just like Yidden could force a Yid when he has to give a get kedin, Goyim could also force a Yid to give a get when it has to be given kedin, and it would be kosher. Now, ma tam amru pasul, why did Chachamim come and say that if Goyim force a get is possible? So every woman that needs a get should not go and find some guy to hit her husband and to force her husband to give her a get, even when it's not done appropriately. So we don't want a woman to resort to such tactics to go and use a guy for this. So, but it's only a gzeidim midrabanan. Really, umafkas, that's when we had baila to take herself out of her husband. But really, min ha-Torah, even Goyim can be used for this. So the Gemara asks on this shot of Rav Misharshi, but if that's the case, shaloi kedin, when Goyish courts force a woman to give a get, so it's said that afil reich a get ainboy, there's no reich of a get here, why not? V'nehevi shaloi kedin be Yisrael. It should be the exact same, like when a Yiddish court forces her to give a get shaloi kedin. Just like there you said that they're not allowed to do that, but still it has a reich a get, so too over here, if a Goyish court, as far as forcing to give a get is the same as a Yiddish court, the halacha should be the same, that it should be a reich a get and should at least be possible to marry a kohen. Umafsinami livsel, she should be possible. Elo, therefore the Gemara says, ha that Rav Misharshia bedusihi. This that Rav Misharshi said that Goyim could force a husband to give a get is a mistake. The time am I, so then if so, why is it when a Goyish court is forcing a person kedin to give a get that we say that there's a reich a get here? That because kedin, b'chedin, the Yisrael mechlav. Because when a Goyish court is forcing this man to give a get when he's supposed to give a get, it could be confused with the get that a Yiddish court is forcing to give a get. And therefore, we don't want these two to be confused, so therefore they said that at least one machmer, that shall become possible to marry a kohen. Shaloi kedin b'chedin Yisrael, however, if the Goyish court is forcing, so it's both the Goyish court and also it's Shaloi kedin b'chedin the Yisrael le'mechlef. It's not going to be confused with the Yiddish court that's giving the get al pidin, and therefore over there's no reason to be geyser about this, and there's no reich a get at all. And as she explains, even though regarding a Yiddish court, when they force Shaloi kedin, she will be possible to marry a kohen, but that's only a gzeida. To be geyser, to confuse when a Goyish court forces Shaloi kedin, that's already gzeida l'gzeida. Chacham were geyser so far. Says the Gemara, a story about this. Abaye ashkechel Rav Yosef. Abaye found Rav Yosef the Yosef ma'asa Gittin, that he was sitting in a situation and he was forcing a man to give a get to his wife because al pidin he was supposed to give a get. Amalei, Abai says to Rav Yosef, how could you do this today? V'ha'anan had yotis hanan. We are just simple judges. We don't have proper smicha. Right? The smicha at a certain point in Eretz Yisrael stopped, and they were here now living in Bavel. They didn't have smicha. So how could you do such a kind of a thing? V'tanya, now why not? Because we learned in the Braisa, Hoy Rab Tarfon Noim Rab Tarfon said, Kol makom shatamoitza agurayis shalev dikachavim. Even whenever you find a group of judges, of Goyish judges, even though they paskin the same as Yiddish judges, you're not allowed to use them for a court case. Shenem, as the pasuk says, you bring all your matters to be settled in a Yiddish court and not in front of a Goyish court, even if they paskin the same. Now, davarach, and this is what's relevant for us here, that you have to use a Yiddish court that has smicha as a proper bezdin and not stamed yatis for important matters. So how could you go and force this man to give a get? Amalei, so Rav Yosef answered, true, we are had yatis, but anan shlichasayu ka'avdinon. We are the messengers, we are doing it as shluchim of those that were smuchim in Eretz Yisrael, and we're doing it in their place. Just like it comes to all other money matters, Haidois and Alvois regarding money matters that the Bezdin, a Yiddish Bezdin, even in Bavel would paskin. How could they paskin? They're not a proper Bezdin, they're only a Yaitis. The answer is, we're doing the shlichus of the proper Bezdin in Eretz Yisrael. Ihachi fragt the Gemara if so gzelis v'chabalis nami, even gzelis and chabalis, which are other matters that the Mishnah in Sanhedrin clearly says that you have to have 3 smuchim to judge these matters, but if not, you can't. But why can't we say that we are like a shluchim of the Bezdin smuchim in Eretz Yisrael? You should be able to paskin in them as well. So the Gemara says no. Ki of shluchasayu b'milsa d'shchiche. We are appointed to be shluchim to fulfill what the Bezdin in Eretz Yisrael does regarding things that are common, regular business dealings and things like that. But when it comes to matters that are not common, which are like zealous and chabalas, when you harm someone or steal, over here we're not appointed for this, and therefore we don't do the shlichus. But it's not. There's a discussion in Taisus and the Rishonim about this. It's not so pashut because b'amis even for zealous and chabalas, we do see in other places in the Gemara that the Bezdin in Bavel and outside of Eretz Yisrael does judge regarding this as well.